Hello. 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 I got a haircut. Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome to my channel. My name is Kylie if this is your first time here, and today I'm excited. Not only because I got a haircut, I got a fresh new look, although if this is your first time here then that means absolutely nothing to you, but because we're gonna be talking about Scream 3. This movie is a tad polarizing because majority of people really don't like it. It has a lot of flaws, but then there are some people that still love it and they just kind of appreciate it for what it is. So I'm curious to see where you guys fall into. I'm curious to see the reception of my opinions on this movie. But before I get into it, I do have to make note of something. So I had tried to pre-film this video before I left for home last week, and I did. However, because my camera can only record 30 minutes at a time, there were 3 separate videos that I recorded for this particular video for my Scream 3 review, and somehow only 2 of them ended up on my laptop in my Scream 3 folder because I designate folders, like I'm very organized. I truly don't know how this happened, but I just fully lost one of the videos. So that was really upsetting, and now I'm kind of on like crunch time. I'm trying to like get this done before tomorrow so I can get this video up on time. I'm so professional. And the only reason that I'm telling you this is because I filmed that portion of the video before I got this haircut. So there is gonna be a really jarring cut at some point of me looking completely different, but that's just showbiz, baby. But let's just get on with the topic of today's video. So today we're gonna be talking about Scream 3 that came out in 2000. It received 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, and here's the synopsis. While Sydney and her friends visit the Hollywood set of Stab 3, the third film based on the Woodsboro murders, another ghost-faced killer rises to terrorize them. Also, if you're new here, I always get into some fun facts about the movie first, then I get into my spoiler-free thoughts on the movie, and then I get into more of a spoiler-filled breakdown. So let's kick it off with some fun facts. Wes Craven filmed 3 different endings for this movie, and he didn't tell the cast and crew which one he was going to use. This film also never had a public screening, and the cast and crew only got to see it at its premiere because Wes Craven didn't want anybody to know the ending. And also the whole debacle with Scream 2 with the script and everything being leaked on the internet, that was a mess. The green outfit worn by Parker Posey in this movie is the same one that Courtney Cox wore in the original Scream in 1996. All sets of Stab 3 were replicas of the originals because the originals had been destroyed after filming. Neve Campbell's contract only allowed her to be on set for 20 days for some reason, so she had a lot less screen time in this movie than in the other films, but as a result of her role being reduced, more emphasis was put on supporting characters like Gail and Dewey. The house used during the climax of this movie is the same house that was used as a school in Halloween H2O 20 years later. Carrie Fisher makes a guest appearance in this movie, and she helped to rewrite some of her lines. Courtney Cox made a statement back then about her husband David Arquette, and she said, "I was just flirting with David on the first one, I was sleeping with him in the second, and we shared a trailer in the third." Because they did meet on the set of the original Scream, and then by this movie they were married. Jamie Lee Curtis was offered the role of Bianca Burnett, but she turned it down. David Boreanaz was considered for the role of Mark Kincaid, and I think I actually would have liked to see that. And Christopher Walken was considered for the role of John Milton. Kevin Williamson was unfortunately unavailable to write the script for this movie, so he only did a brief outline. And then Aaron Kruger came in, and he basically wrote the entire script on the fly. He kind of just disregarded that outline. The pages that he wrote were usually not finished until the day that they were supposed to be filmed, and apparently the characters didn't bear any resemblance to the ones that they portrayed in the original movies, and so Wes Craven had to do rewrites of those rewrites. In an Entertainment Tonight interview with David Arquette, he said that he is the one that suggested to Courtney Cox that she cut her bangs in that style. Well, okay, not in that style, obviously. The hairdresser did mess up the vision, but it was originally his idea. And so then came the infamous bangs. And finally, Wes Craven has a cameo in this movie. He plays a tourist who is just walking around behind the Stab 3 set. So I actually really like this movie. I know that most people don't, but then I feel like, you know, there's some of us that just, we recognize it for its flaws, we recognize its weaknesses, but we still love it. We still follow the characters that we love. There's some really good, strong meta commentary, and there's also some really good social commentary, which we will unpack a little bit later. I think that one reason why I found this movie to be really enjoyable is because they're making commentary on the film industry itself and sort of the slasher industry. And I found it really relatable because like that's my industry. I'm a film student, like that's the direction that I'm going. And I also love that the Scream movies aren't afraid to make commentary on the very like filmmakers that do it. Like they're making commentary on themselves, you know? And I really like it because I just feel like a lot of other genres kind of shy away from this. Most movies about LA are all so rosy and it's all about the palm trees and, you know, Beverly Hills and everything everything is great in LA, it's a great place to be. But in this movie, it is a very soulless and unfortunately very realistic portrayal of the film industry. For example, yet again, they have this one black character that makes commentary on the lack of black representation in film. He also kind of goes into the fact that he can't even turn down stereotypical roles and whatever because like there just aren't as many opportunities for black people in Hollywood. He's unfortunate. Oh my god, this crow. I'm gonna beat your ass. I'm just gonna yell at this crow. Ah! Excuse me, I just have to go kill this bird really quick. Okay. He's unfortunately not really a fleshed out character though. He is just kind of there to deliver that commentary and he still dies. So again, I'm not really sure what they were going for with that, if they're like calling themselves out, if they're failing to see the irony of making that commentary and then not really giving him much representation or any depth. I also just realized that they put the black guy on the movie poster. Like, I just find it a little bit strange because he is by no means a main character. He's barely even a side character. Like, he has a couple of lines. And I'm really curious about that because it kind of seems like they're selling representation. They're selling like, hey, we have a token black guy. I don't know, that seems a little bit sus. It seems a little bit suspect because like then like how do people feel when they watch the movie and they realize that he's like barely even a character? Seems a little bit tricky. I don't know about it. There's also some commentary with this woman character and she's like playing a 35-year-old that's playing a 21-year-old in the Stab 3 movie. This is sort of an allusion to the way that Hollywood fetishizes youth, particularly in women. I've talked about it very briefly on my channel before about how people that are supposed to be playing high schoolers in TV shows are usually in their late 20s to early 30s. And it's just like so blatantly strange that they try to sexualize people that are supposed to be playing minors. See the cast of Riverdale and 13 Reasons Why in particular, Netflix, I'm calling you out. And even though these moments of commentary were super brief, they were kind of just lines of dialogue that were dropped and you could easily miss them, they were still incredibly potent. And we'll actually be breaking that down kind of line by line in the spoiler section. In terms of characters, I love that Sydney gets increasingly more insecure about her safety. We see that with the opening of her character in every movie because in Scream 2, we had her just with like this little caller ID thing on her phone. She wasn't really too worried. And then in this movie, she has this whole security system on her house. Every entryway to her house is sealed, and she also lives in a kind of remote place where nobody knows where she is. She's not really in contact with anyone but her dad, and like nobody knows her real name. I thought it was phenomenal like how realistic that character development was because oftentimes in horror the characters are just stupid because like we need to drive the plot somehow. The characters have to make bad choices, but Sydney doesn't. The character development that I did not need to see more of was the relationship growing between Dewey and Gale, and we will talk about that more during spoilers. But still, we have the best characters coming back, Sydney and Gale, and I think that they really are at their strongest in this movie. Maybe not Gale because Dewey kind of overshadows her. Again, we'll get into that. But Sydney absolutely is. And even though I recognize that this is definitely the weakest of the franchise, I still love it. Which I'm showing my boyfriend all these movies. Mason did not like it. He thought that this movie sucked, but again, I related to it because it was making commentary on my industry. So I still connected with the movie. And actually, before I get onto my spoiler section, there were some new characters they brought in that I just wanted to briefly touch on. Mark Kincaid was one of the new detectives in this movie. He's played by Patrick Dempsey. I found him to be very unnecessary. I just don't feel invested in those characters at all because this is the third movie in the franchise, okay? So it's really hard to bring in new characters unless you give them a really good amount of depth and a lot of really good exposition in a clear and concise way. It can't drag on, they can't become the new main characters by any means, you know, it's really hard to do. One franchise that does this extremely well, that does a lot of visual storytelling, is Harry Potter, which I am also covering right now. And the only other franchise that is coming to mind, like just off the top of my head right now, is Child's Play, where in the fourth one they brought in Jennifer Tilly. Mwah. Anyways, don't want to get too sidetracked. I just did not care about these police officers. They were not interesting. At this point, I only care about my core cast, and really the only people that are left that I care about are Gale and Sydney. But I will say that the other really strong character that they brought into this movie that I did like was Parker Posey playing Jennifer Jolie. I also love how both her real name and the characters' names are alliterations. She was worth it for me, and granted she is somewhat of a punchline. Like I recognize they didn't write her to be very likable, but I thought she was really funny, and like for her performance performance, I thought it was great. But she, Gale, and Sydney were probably the only characters that I liked in this entire movie. So that being said, I think that that is where this film lacks in particular. I think it just doesn't have strong enough characters. And it's my presumption that that is why this is the least well-liked in the franchise, because the first two movies had incredibly strong characters, super likable people. Because for me, the cast of the first movie just, it feels like home. It's such a comfort movie. I love all the characters so much. This cast feels very cold and distant and very much sucked into the empty life of movie making in LA. That's just my analysis and my kind of guess as to why most people don't like this one very much. But I still highly recommend this film. If you haven't seen it, definitely go watch it and then come back to my video for the spoiler section, which is starting right now. First off, I am going to get into some fun facts that contain spoilers though. Throughout this movie, the actors and the actresses of Stab 3 complain about rewrites of the script. The complaints actually originated with the real cast of this movie because of all the rewrites like I mentioned earlier. When Sydney jumps over the bar in this movie and stabs the killer in the back with an ice pick, Neve Campbell actually hit flesh because she missed the pad she was supposed to hit with it. So in that scene, Scott Foley's scream is genuine. Another idea for Jamie Kennedy's character Randy to have survived Scream 2 was to have been secretly rescued by his family. They ultimately deemed this to be a little bit too far-fetched, and I would agree that would have been really hard to accomplish because like when they opened that door in the van, he was dead. So they brought him back via that little video instead. I think it also would have been too similar to the way that Dewey survived in Scream 2 because we thought that he was dead too, and then in the end of the movie it was like, surprise! Dewey's still alive for some reason. In a 2009 interview, Matthew Lillard said that he was supposed to reprise his role for this movie, and the original script had him sort of conducting all the kills from prison targeting high school students. However, that idea was completely scrapped and totally rewritten because production began very shortly after the Columbine shooting, and so they didn't want to have it set in a high school setting, which understandably so. Tyson Fox said that Cotton Weary's murderer was probably some Stab fan pissed off they killed Randy in Stab 2, which is a reference to Scream fanatics being extremely mad that Randy died in Scream 2. Wes Craven actually got so many hate emails because of this that they decided to resurrect Randy via that video. So without a bunch of hate emails and angry fans, we would have never gotten to see Randy again. So I guess we can be kind of grateful for that. Jenny McCarthy plays a character named Sarah who complains that she only has 2 scenes before she's killed in Stab 3. Jenny only has 2 scenes in Scream 3 before she's killed as well. At one point during production, Detective Wallace was supposed to be one of the killers, and for a little bit I thought that he was one of them. Okay, after this next fun fact there will be a really jarring cut, so I'm just warning you right now. And for my last fun fact, Liev Schreiber actually came up with the idea for his character to be killed off in the opening scene. Which is kind of hard to imagine because if I were involved in a franchise as iconic as this, and if I were in his shoes, I don't think I can see myself doing the same thing. But that does it for my fun facts, and speaking of the opening of this movie, let's start off our conversation with that. So this is probably my second least favorite opening to a Scream movie, I think because it just didn't feel very impactful. Cause like, who cares about Cotton? I don't know, because he seemed to have devolved into this ego-tripping movie star, so who would care about that? Well, in a way, I guess it is smart to use him in the opening because yeah, I mean, who cares about Cotton? It was low stakes enough to open the movie, but it was also high stakes enough by connecting to the plots of the previous 2 movies. So I guess I can't really see any other way that they would have opened the movie unless they killed off Dewey. That might have been cool. But I definitely care less for Cotton than I do for Dewey. Not because he's less likable, but well, I mean, that might be debatable, but it's just because there was no more story left for Cotton. His storyline was done. So the choice was good. I think I just still found it boring because I knew that we had to wrap up this character's storyline, but it was just boring because I didn't care about him. But as for the other characters from this franchise that we are reintroduced to, we have some more positive notes. The way they reopened on Sydney's character, as I mentioned, I think was brilliant. I thought that was really smart character development with her. She has super high security. She only sees her dad. Oh, and her dad comes back for this movie. But that went nowhere. I don't think that he needed to be there, and also I don't think anybody was like, oh hey, you know what happened to Sydney's dad? Why don't they bring him back for Scream 3? And then of course we have Gale and Dewey. The whole will they won't they of Dewey and Gale, I don't care. Like, it is so boring. You already did this in the last movie and I'm supposed to care about their dumb little subplot again? In Scream 2 they had this tension in the opening of the movie when the characters reconnect again because it was like, oh, they didn't work out, and then the same thing happened in this movie. I was like, they're recycling this subplot, why? Because Gale could do so much better than Dewey. It just seems like he's always trying to minimize her and bring her down, and he's like, why didn't you stay in Woodsboro? Woodsboro's still cool. And I think it's supposed to be sweet when he's like, well, what's wrong with just being Gale Weathers? Like, man, let her be the next Diane Sawyer. Like, let this woman pursue her very obviously successful career, and then by the end of the movie they're engaged? What? Holy fuck. It just seems like the opposite of an arc because she backpedals and is like, yeah, alright, I'll settle for Dewey. Maybe that's another reason why this movie is not very well liked. There is simply too much Dewey in this movie, and for the whole movie, why does he look like this? He looks like he's trying so hard to work the little cogs in his brain. I think he just overshadowed Gale too much, and the highlight of a lot of these movies is when Gale and Sydney are just being badass women. And I will give it to them that, you know, it's probably because Nev wasn't able to be in this movie as much. Like I mentioned, she could only be on set for 20 days, which is not very long. I just think it's weird that that's the direction they took, but I don't know, maybe they didn't have any other choice because those were the only core characters left. Because besides the three of them, the only core character that was brought back was Randy, and it was only for that little scene, which, okay, let's talk about that because I kind of loved it. Because while that may be far-fetched for a different franchise, it was so on brand for his character. It was super believable. And it was all on par with the commentary that we'd seen from him from previous films, and we have never really explored trilogy commentary before. Even though now we obviously know there's a fourth film, there's gonna be a fifth film, so the stakes that were raised in this movie don't really age well, but it's good commentary nonetheless. And that being said, I do want to get to the part of this video where I pick out all my favorite dialogue, my favorite commentary, and we unpack that a little bit. So like I mentioned, there was dialogue in this movie about how fans were mad that Randy died in Stab 2, aka Scream 2. I liked that. They also commented on the lack of black representation, and that's legit, but yet again, it's like, where's the follow through with this commentary? And getting to my favorite line of dialogue that I want to talk about today is that pop culture is the politics of the 21st century. This is the most important quote that I want to cover because it is absolutely facts. So if you're new here, I do have my bachelor's degree in film production and film theory, and I actually took 2 semesters of classes covering film theory and politics in cinema. And I love this line of dialogue because it is true that everything that you see on screen is some form of cultural representation. From the people that they choose to be the main characters, to the dialogue, to the clothing that they wear, they all signal something about a person's socioeconomic standing, their culture, their race, etc. Because a certain degree of bias goes into every choice that's made from the collective life experience of all the filmmakers. The reason why this is such an important thing to pay attention to in film is because everything you see on screen was deliberately chosen to look that way and be represented that way. The world is fabricated and it's built by just a handful of people, and that's why representation matters so much. If you think about like little tiny farm towns that are scattered throughout the middle of the US that probably don't have a single person of color in them, the representation of people of color in film is probably all that they'll ever see. And for the longest time, people of color were caricaturized as really harmful stereotypes. People really tend to neglect how important representation is in film because it can perpetuate racism, xenophobia, fatphobia, ableism, depending on how all these groups are represented. And people really have had the nerve in the past to like comment under my videos that they take issue with the fact that I'm trying to be woke, as if having an education on this stuff is a bad thing, but I digress. They'll claim that films don't change people's perceptions on these minority groups, and I'm like, they wouldn't dedicate entire national studies and majors to studying these concepts if it weren't an obvious issue, and if we as a society did not need to become more culturally sensitive. And when you live in one of the most wonderfully diverse countries in the world, one of the most wonderfully diverse cities in the world in LA where these movies are being produced, it's a choice, it's a form of erasure. And if that makes you mad for some reason that I'm commenting on this and kind of trying to shed light on it, maybe unpack that a little bit. Along with that, in my screenwriting and my other creative writing classes, when you're telling a story, there has to be some sort of goal. If you want your characters to have an even slightly stimulating arc, then they need to learn something, which in turn your audience will learn as well. So like, what lesson are you trying to teach? These are all factors that are really important because it's a not so subtle form of manipulation, you know? And this movie is a good example of that because they do make really good commentary, whether or not they actually, you know, follow through with it and try to break free of of some of the tropes. They do make really good commentary. Some other highlights with the dialogue, I do love the character of Sarah Darling. I think that the points that she makes are really good. I also thought it was hilarious when she said stab 3, ugh, I need a better agent, because she was starring in Scream 3 and it's just, I mean, the meta-ness, again, it's a lot, but I liked that dialogue. I also think this movie was somewhat of a love letter to the people that have worked on this franchise. I love kind of some of the behind the scenes stuff that we got to see. The design of Woodsboro in this movie with the set was so cool. That was one of my favorite chase scenes when Sydney was running through that crazy set of the house. And they showed one of the actors having a makeup test on him. I think there was like a cleaver in his head or something. So these are really cool little things, and I thought that it was really nice that they were just paying a sort of a small homage to the set designers and the special effects makeup artists. And they referenced how Scream 2 got leaked, which I think that this movie might be slightly alienating if you aren't fans of the first two movies, because this movie is so self-referential. On that note, I've seen people on YouTube making videos about there supposedly being a Scream 5 script leak or something. If you have love for this franchise, honestly, why would you do that? Do you have no respect for the people that made that movie, or for the people that don't want this movie spoiled for them? At the very least, have some respect for the deceased Wes Craven, who probably would not want all of the script details aired on the internet. Anyways, that's a totally different digression. I want to give a small trigger warning just because with this next part that I'm going to discuss, I'm just very vaguely going to get into the part of the plot where they discuss sexual assault. Again, it's very bold because this is a moment where this movie is kind of calling out the industry as a whole, and it's also very weird and very uncomfortable because Bob and Harvey Weinstein were producers on all 4 of the first Scream movies. So it's just very disturbing to me that that was a subplot of this movie because of, you know, like everything that happened with Harvey Weinstein. Don't want to talk about it, just, it's disgusting. So moving on, I want to get on to some other highlights of the movie. I loved Carrie Fisher's cameo. It was super random and I really don't think it was earned, but like I love her, so I liked it. It was kind of reminiscent of Sarah Michelle Gellar's cameo, but like way bigger. And as for the twist ending of this movie, okay, I think it's a pretty cool idea. I do think it was a little bit too far-fetched. Like, a secret brother mastermind. Okay. I just think that the way that Sydney and her dad really did not know of her mom's past at all was just a little bit out there. Not the fact that she was in LA for 2 years. I think that's fully believable that, you know, she wanted to pursue acting or whatever. That's, you know, that happens to a lot of people. But the fact that she would reject a child from the night of that incident that shows up on her doorstep, like, it's hard to even begin to understand that. And I just don't really see a world in which Sydney would never really recognize any of this in her mother. Like, she wouldn't recognize that anything is kind of off about her mom or recognize any trauma in her mom. Like, how did none of that leak into her perfect little suburban life? But with the way that the story was told and with the reveal and with that really cool location of where the climax happened and everything, I did like the twist. I liked how the story played out. While I recognize that this is obviously not Wes Craven's best effort and that this movie is ultimately just kind of an implosion of a deliriously self-referential franchise, I still love it. I still think it's really fun. I don't know. I like the mystery of it. I think that the twist is really cool. I enjoyed it. I also think that Sydney is quite possibly at her best here. I think that the ending fight scene is one of the best of the franchise. Our hero takes some very serious blows, but then ultimately kicks ass. And then it's all ruined by Dewey proposing to Gail, but then that gets fixed by Sydney having closure and leaving her door open. But then there was another movie. So that's, you know, that's a good thing because then this wasn't the final note of the franchise. And I know that I ragged on this movie a lot despite saying that I still love it, and it's because, you know what, for what it is, I think you have to enjoy it. Like, you can't go into it expecting it to be as good as the first and second. You kind of just have to love it for what it is. And for the location that it was in and for the characters that it showed about kind of the production of movies in LA, I thought it was really accurate. It had kind of that weird soulless feel to it that this entire town unfortunately has. And I also don't think that this movie is even close to being the type of mess that we've gotten from sequels in other franchises, so I just don't really see the hate for this one as much, I guess. In conclusion, I'm cool with it. That does it for this review, so if you'd like early access to my content or you'd like some special bonus content, you can join my Patreon, that'll be linked down below. If you'd like to follow me on social media or follow my vlog channel and my daily lifestyle stuff, then you can follow that, that'll be linked down below as well. I hope that you join me for my final review of this series with Scream 4 next week. That's gonna be a lot of fun. I hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!